Perfect software, the enemy of rapid delivery. I'm from The Guardian in London. For those of you who don't know The Guardian, we're the second largest English language online news organisation in the world. We have 9 million visitors to our website and our mobile news apps every day. We won a Pulitzer Prize in 2014 for our journalism. We have a development team of around 150 people in our department, and we release our software around 100 times a day across all of our products and all of our platforms. So in the kind of context of rapid delivery, that's what I mean. We release our software around 100 times a day. So the aim of my talk today is to persuade you that an obsession with perfection in our software and our software development processes is outdated, it's unnecessary, and it's holding us back from delivering our software at the pace that our users want and our business requires. So I'm going to try and convince you that doing away with perfect software is the way forward. And in order to do this, I'm going to try and answer 3 questions. I'm going to talk about what do I mean by perfect software, and then I'm going to talk about why and whether we need our software to be perfect. And then lastly, I'm going to talk about how The Guardian has learnt to work with less perfection, and I'm going to have a bit of a case study in that. So what do I mean by perfect software? Okay, so I'm going to take you back to the golden olden days of software delivery, when the software that you created or you consumed probably looked a bit like that. It came in a box. It came with a whole bunch of documentation and installer disks. And when you wanted to buy your software or get some software, you'd go down to a shop, an actual physical shop, bricks and mortar, a building. You'd walk into that shop, you'd select your software, you'd pay for it with actual physical money. Remember that? And you'd take your software home or to your office, and you'd sit down with your installer disk and you'd install it. If you were lucky, those installers would be DVDs. If you were unlucky, or like me, or just old, those installers would be floppy disks. And you'd sit there with your installer disks, installer 1, installer 2, installer 3, installing your software. It was an actual physical process. If you wanted to update your software, you'd have to do the same thing. You'd go back to the shop, pay your money, buy your software, take it home, update it, install it. It's a very, very physical process. And you'd probably update your software once a year, or once every year and a half, or something like that, not very frequently. And as a consequence, that software, it had to be perfect. It had to be fully featured. It had to anticipate the needs of its users for a year in advance. It'd have to anticipate the market. It'd have to have great documentation. And it would have to be, of course, bug-free. Your software would have to be perfect, because if you had a problem with your software, if it was less than perfect, you'd have to wait a week or a year or more to update it, to fix that problem. The non-negotiable rhythm of delivery of your software dictated that need for perfection. Okay, so while we were busy building this perfect software, something else was happening along the way. The internet was happening. So in the year 2000, when my story begins, the 30% of the developed world had access to the internet, but that was like dial-up internet, it was slow. Move forward to today, to 2016, 2017, 80% of the developed world now have access to broadband internet, 3.2 billion internet users worldwide. And of course, that has had an impact on the way we both build and ship and deliver our software delivery process has changed from being a very physical thing to being an electronic thing. And as a consequence of that, we started shipping more frequently. So years back, it was once every year. Then, with the advent of the internet, we were able to ship our software once every 6 months, once every 3 months, once a month, once every 2 weeks, up until once a day, and several times a day, until now. Your software can be updated without you even knowing it. It's a new dawn. It's the new dawn. The internet has changed the mode of delivery and created the possibility that we can change the pace of delivery. And that means that our software development processes need to change fundamentally to take advantage of this. Okay, but even though we can ship our software all the time now, I would say that an obsession with perfection is stopping us from doing this. We need to let go of these outdated ideas that we need our software to be perfect and embrace the idea of a bit of imperfection. Okay, so I'm saying that we're kind of being held back from doing this. But it's not the case that everybody has been held back from shipping their software and changing their processes in order to do that. So in 2001, the idea of lean product development and MVP came about. The Agile Manifesto was being talked about. Skip forward a few years, and of course, continuous delivery, continuous integration is being talked about. DevOps, automation, here we are. Engineers and product are all happily embracing new methods of working in order to take advantage of the ability to ship more frequently. But there are other teams and other groups of practitioners in the software development lifecycle who are against the idea, I would say, of shipping more frequently. They're kind of the barrier to shipping more frequently. They're kind of the bottleneck to shipping more frequently. And there's a tension between those who want to change to ship more frequently and those who are just who want to slow things down because they still want their products to be perfect. So I'm going to talk a bit now about how at The Guardian that we've resolved those differences between the teams that want to ship more quickly and the teams who want to hold up the shipping more quickly and be perfect. And I've been talking about this in terms of QA for a couple of years now, about how we've kind of really reacted against the idea of perfection. But last year, I suddenly realized there were other teams in The Guardian who had also rejected the notion of perfection. And so I wanted to kind of synthesize this idea that we have at The Guardian and talk to you about it here. So I'm going to talk about QA, and I'm going to talk about UX, and I'm talking about data, and what we did to reduce our reliance on perfection. And how we started working towards perfection after release, rather than using it as a starting point. Okay, so first of all, I'm going to talk about the team that I run, the quality team, the QA team. I'm going to talk about what the idea of perfection is for quality and QA. Of course, the idea of perfection in terms of QA is the idea of having bug-free software before you release to production. It's the idea of having much time to kind of take your time to test something thoroughly, ensuring that it's what your users will expect, that it's bug-free, that it's and that you have huge suites of automated regression, which is so popular now in the world of QA, that kind of guarantee you confidence that your product is perfect before you ship it. But this perfection, it comes at a price, right? And we know that. We know that QA is often the bottleneck to shipping production. But I would say it's unnecessary. Bug-free software is unnecessary. If you can fix things quickly in the context of continuous delivery, why do you need to guarantee that they're perfect before you release to production? So at The Guardian, we decided to change the way we think about quality, and we decided to pursue a kind of an ethos, if you like, of light touch test, where we thought it was okay to push our features to production and fix them if they were broken in production by monitoring carefully and not have to be obsessed by making it perfect before we deliver. So we shifted our focus from the kind of pre-production realm to the post-production realm. We shipped quickly with only the kind of barest minimum of testing that we thought was acceptable to do before we shipped. And then we would just try very hard to find our bugs in production and fix them. And of course, this is all framed in a context of being able to ship at will, to roll out at will, and roll back at will. You can't do this without a toolbox of techniques which are kind of generally well understood in the continuous delivery world. So we have single feature releases, which mean that we can track back our problems quickly if we do release them to production. We have canary releases for particularly risky features, so we just deploy to certain subsets of our users. We have feature switches, so all of our features have feature flags or feature switches, so we can turn them off if they break something. And of course, we have a large amount of monitoring and alerting, which is the domain of the QA team, that allow us to find, identify bugs in production and fix them quickly if need to. So we kind of changed our mindset from a team that kind of purely focused on the pre-release environment to being a team which focused on the kind of post-release environment. And enabling us to do this, we kind of run our automated tests or checks after deploy in our live environment rather than before. We monitor our critical user journeys in production to make sure that we haven't broken anything. And we invest time and energy in using our kind of analytics that we've created for our business analytics to make sure that we can see that we haven't broken anything in production as well. And we've replaced our traditional testers with beta programs, especially for our mobile apps, which means that rather than test things using conventional testing and large numbers of hours of regression testing, we ship to our betas straight away and use our beta testers to test things for us. So in summary, the QA team, for our QA team, imperfection means embracing a kind of an attitude of not wrong long, of shipping something to production and being confident in the ability to find a bug in production and fix it, rather than spending all our time up front before we release it to production. So what does this mean for our UX team? Well, generally for a UX team, the idea of perfection is perfect prototypes. It means kind of creating fully functioning, beautiful prototypes that adhere to all your design guidelines, that you can put in front of increasing numbers of carefully picked out testers, so that you can make sure that you can guarantee that any feature that you release to production, that you're absolutely certain that that feature is going to be wanted and needed by your users before you ship it to production. But that kind of perfection that our UX team were used to was slowing us down as well. And we had this kind of ironic situation where the QA team had always been the bottleneck in the past. And once we kind of started shipping to production with no QA, our UX team had then become the bottleneck. And they were so obsessed, they were so terrified of releasing something to production that they didn't know whether the users would want, that they were really, really holding up our ability to ship quickly. So we decided to get rid of the idea of perfect prototypes and instead adopt a lean UX approach to our features. We realized that we didn't need to build perfect things before we shipped them, and that it was sometimes okay to experiment on our users. And that creating a perfect prototype was a barrier to being able to rapidly realize features before shipping them to production. We wanted to validate our ideas in days rather than months. And so what did that mean in reality? It meant getting rid of the idea of perfect prototypes and instead adopting the idea of the design sprint, which is kind of the essence of lean UX, first put forward by Jake Knapp. We had design sprints, which are really tight design sprints, which are discovery periods, which are time boxed to a week. You get everybody from your product team in a room in order to solve a business problem. And you generate many, many, many ideas over the course of that week in order to solve your business problem. And you work with very rough prototypes. And those prototypes could be anything from a back of an envelope sketch to a PDF to a wireframe. Anything to get them in front of your users quickly and iterate throughout the week until by the end of the week you've got really a very, very good sense of what your users might want in order to solve a particular problem. And because you've kind of spent a very, very short amount of time, you've generated lots of ideas, it's very, very easy to reject ideas that aren't accepted by your users because you don't kind of hang on, you're not precious about your ideas because you've invested very little time in creating them in the first place. So you come to the end of your design sprint, you've got a kind of good idea of what to put in front of your users, and then we kind of move on to prototyping those ideas that we wanted to carry forward, but with minimum development work. Absolutely minimum development work we can get away with. And in order to do this, we've adopt several kind of lean UX techniques again. We do Wizard of Oz tests, which means basically putting an idea in front of the users and fooling them into thinking that you've kind of created something with a computer when you haven't, when you just, it's something done by a human. So a good example of this is we wanted to create a chat bot in our Facebook pages, but we didn't want to go to all the kind of process of creating kind of the engineering around that in order to find out that our users didn't want it. So we just created a kind of small kind of front end that our users could type in, can you tell me where the article by somebody or other is? And at the back end of that, instead of having some kind of big machine learning tool that we created, we just had somebody sitting in the back office Googling the problem themselves and then answering the user. It's genius. But without doing any engineering, we kind of found out whether our users wanted that chatbot or not. Secondly, you can create prototypes for users without building anything at all. We wanted to know whether our users would be interested in a particular app, but we didn't build the app. What we did was we photoshopped a picture of the App Store for iOS with some screenshots that we'd taken of what the app might look like with a whole bunch of blurb about what the features were, and we just put it in front of our users and said, would you buy this app? And they told us yes or no. We had a very good sense of whether our users would want that app or not, just not by doing any work at all. And finally, we use often a kind of fake door tests, which for me is the kind of epitome of imperfect software, where you kind of create a button on your website that users can press to. So for us, we wanted to know whether our users were interested. Got to speed up. Whether our users were interested in a particular feature on our website, put a button saying, press here for this feature. And of course, it takes them to a 404 page, which says, we haven't got this feature yet. We're deciding whether to build it. Please sign up here if you're interested in it. Serving up a 404 page to your users is the epitome, I would say, of an imperfect software solution. But brilliant in order to gauge whether your users are interested or not. So for our UX team, it's about resisting the temptation to make something perfect before shipping it to production, and it's about resisting the temptation sometimes to make something at all before shipping to production. It's rapidly creating and experimenting with lots of ideas and adopting a culture of continuous improvement and working towards perfection rather than starting for it. Very briefly, data. With data for us, perfection has meant tracking everything. Just track everything. Just create a feature, track everything on it. Is that what you do? You've got so much data, you think, we'll look at that data sometime down the line. We'll just track it now. But that tracking of data and that ability to kind of go forward without having huge amounts of data meant that you're kind of paralyzed. You're paralyzed by the amount of data. It needs updating all the time. It needs, the cost and the scale of it is ridiculous. And it's slowing our ability down to make anything. So we got rid of the idea of tracking everything. And instead, we decided that we're going to adopt an approach of just minimal amount of tracking things only if and when we know that we need to track it. We need to ask questions about why we're tracking something rather than just tracking it for the sake of it, and track only our critical paths. We want to adopt the idea of less is more in tracking and data, and really have a hypothesis about something before we start analysing our data. And realise, interestingly, that not everything has to be A/B tested, that sometimes that if you want to A/B test something, you have to wait so long to get statistical significance on something that you might as well not have bothered in the first place. So for our data team, it's about realising that if you're waiting to get statistical significance, then you've waited too long. So this is what we do at The Guardian. This is the approach we take in order to be able to allow us to ship more quickly. And just to answer a question before anybody asks it, how can you do this with your users? What do your customers and stakeholders think of this when you start experimenting on them and you release software that's less than perfect? You can't do this approach without continuous delivery and rapid delivery. You can't do it unless you can quickly solve your mistakes. And you can't do it unless you have a lot of engaged and loyal users, which The Guardian is very fortunate to have. But if you can ship quickly, then your users and your stakeholders are happy. Your users have got the features when they need them, and your stakeholders are happy because you've shipped more quickly and answered your business questions more quickly. So in conclusion, at the start, I said, I've got 14 seconds, the aim of the talk to persuade you that perfection was unnecessary and outdated in the world of continuous delivery, that it's slowing us down and we should reject it. I've talked about why we need perfection, or why we needed perfection in the past, and I've talked about why we don't need it now. And I've shown how it's a barrier to shipping more frequently. And I would say perfection should not be the starting point, but the end point of your software delivery cycle. And more broadly, we need to adapt to this new phase in software delivery lifecycle where we can ship at will and reject the idea of perfection. But I should also say we should have no fear of perfection because we'll never reach it.